My younger son, a pilot, called me. "Mom, something strange is happening." "My sister-in-law is at the house." "Yes, she is," I replied. "She's in the shower." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That's impossible. I have her passport in my hands. She just boarded my flight to France." At that very moment, I heard footsteps behind me. "I'm glad you're home." If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. This morning, just like any other, I was rushing to do the dishes after breakfast. My older son, Stephen, had left for work early, leaving the house quiet. His son, my grandson Matthew, that clever little rascal of 7, had already been picked up by the school bus, and Araceli, my daughter-in-law, Stephen's wife, had just gone upstairs. Her soft voice floated down to me. "Mom, I'm going to take a quick shower, okay?" I nodded, smiling. I had barely put away the last plate when the landline rang. I dried my hands on my apron and hurried to answer. The cheerful, youthful voice of my younger son, Ivan, filled the line. "Mom, I just wanted to say hi. I had some free time during a layover at the airport." Hearing his voice felt like a warm hug. Ivan is my pride and joy, a young co-pilot who's always on the move, living out the childhood dream he had of conquering the skies. I smiled and asked him a few questions about his flight, about how he was doing. He laughed heartily and said everything was great, that work was going smoothly, but suddenly his tone changed, as if he was hesitant to say something. "Hey, Mom, something really weird happened." "My sister-in-law is at the house?" I was puzzled. I looked toward the stairs, where I could still hear the water running in the bathroom. "Of course she is, honey. Araceli is upstairs taking a shower," I replied, completely certain. Araceli had talked to me less than 10 minutes ago, and she was wearing that white blouse she always wore around the house. How could I be wrong? But on the other end of the line, Ivan was silent for a long while, so long that I could hear his breathing. Then his voice became very serious, full of amazement. "Mom, that's impossible because I have her passport right here in my hand. She just got on my flight headed for France." I laughed, thinking he must have been mistaken. "Oh, honey, you must have seen wrong. I just saw Araceli. She even told me she was going to take a shower." I tried to explain calmly to reassure him, but he didn't laugh. He didn't answer me like he always did. He told me in a slow voice, as if he was trying to put the story in order in his head, that after all the passengers had boarded, he ran out to look for some papers he'd forgotten and accidentally found a passport lying near the boarding gate. At first, he thought about giving it to the airport staff, but when he opened it to see who it belonged to, he froze. The photo was of Araceli. Her name was right there, clear as day. There was no way to get it wrong. My heart began to beat faster, but I tried to stay calm. "Are you sure, Ivan? That passport could be someone else's," I said, even though a tiny thorn of uneasiness had already pricked me. Ivan sighed, and his voice was now a mix of bewilderment and firmness. "Mom, I just went down to the passenger cabin to check if it was her. She's sitting in first class next to a man who looks very rich and elegant. They were talking very close, like they were a couple." Ivan's words were like a stab. I stood frozen, gripping the phone receiver. My head was spinning. A couple? Impossible. I had just heard Araceli's voice from upstairs. I had just seen her in the flesh in this very house. But right at that moment, the sound of the water in the bathroom stopped. I heard the bedroom door open, and Araceli's voice came down the stairs. It was soft, but loud enough to make me jump. "Mom, who is it?" I panicked. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it was going to burst out of my chest. "Just a friend of mine," I replied quickly, my voice trembling, and I hurried into the living room to avoid Araceli's gaze as she peeked her head out from the stairs, her hair still soaked. I closed the door and whispered into the phone, trying not to let my nervousness show. "Ivan, I just heard Araceli. She's here. She just finished showering. Are you sure you didn't make a mistake?" On the other side, Ivan fell silent again, and then his voice became harsher. "Mom, it's impossible. I have her right in front of me on this plane. I'm looking at her right now." I was speechless, my mind blank. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so much that I almost dropped the receiver. The living room suddenly felt suffocating, even though the sun was shining brightly outside. I collapsed onto the couch, trying to take a deep breath, but my chest felt heavy with an unanswered question. If Araceli was here, who was the woman on Ivan's flight? And if the woman on the flight was Araceli, who was the person in my house? A few minutes later, Araceli came down to the kitchen. She was wearing a clean, light blue dress, her hair still damp, and she smiled with the same sweetness as always. "Mom, I'm going to the market early today. Do you want me to get you any vegetables or anything?" Her voice was kind, familiar, as if nothing strange was happening. I looked at her, trying to force a smile, but inside, I felt as if I was carrying stones. "Yes, honey. Bring some tomatoes, please," I replied, my throat dry. Araceli nodded. She took her wicker basket and walked out of the house. Her silhouette disappeared behind the gate. I stood there, watching her go with a whirlwind in my soul. I didn't believe Ivan was lying to me. My son had no reason to invent a story like this. He had always been an honest boy, very sensitive and affectionate with his family. But Araceli, the daughter-in-law I had lived with for so many years, was also in front of me, in the flesh. Unmistakable. I asked myself, could there be something I've missed? Is there some secret in this house that I, an old woman, have never noticed? I sat in silence in the living room as the midday sun filtered through the curtains, casting faint stripes of light on the tiled floor. The old armchair where I always sit to knit or read stories to. Matthew also seemed heavier now. Ivan's call kept echoing in my head. Every one of his words was like a hammer blow to my heart. I looked around the room where the family photos hung. Stephen and Araceli on their wedding day, newborn Matthew, and Ivan's radiant smile when he first put on his pilot's uniform. All those memories now seemed covered by a haze, blurry and full of doubt. My name is Stella Brooks, a 65-year-old widow who lives in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona. My husband, Raphael, passed away 10 years ago, leaving me with the two sons I love more than my own life. Stephen, the oldest, is a hard-working architect, always immersed in his blueprints and projects. Ivan, the youngest, is my pride for having made his dream of being a pilot come true. My life revolves around Stephen's small family, my daughter-in-law, Araceli, and my grandson, Matthew, and the peaceful days in this house. Araceli, my daughter-in-law, was always the perfect model in my eyes. She was beautiful, industrious, always impeccable, from the way she dressed to how she cared for Matthew. I still remember the day of their wedding, a big party held in the yard of her parents' house. Even though Araceli's family wasn't wealthy, they put in their utmost effort to make everything perfect. Araceli came into my house with a confident smile and a bright look, as if she had been born to be a wonderful wife and mother. I used to think how lucky I was to have a daughter-in-law like her. After Araceli left for the market, I stayed seated, unconsciously gripping the edge of the tablecloth. Ivan's call made me re-examine small details that had seemed normal before. There were days when Araceli would leave the house saying she was going to the market or to see a friend, but when she returned, she seemed like a different person. One day she was all sweetness, hugging Matthew and singing to him to put him to sleep, but on other days she was in a bad mood and would yell at me just because I forgot to put the salt shaker back in its place. I used to think they were just the mood swings of a young woman, but now I wasn't so sure. My heart was tied in a knot, as if someone was messing with all the memories I had cherished for so long. I remember once, a few months ago, Araceli took a pen to write the grocery list with her right hand. Her handwriting was very straight and neat, but the next day I saw her using her left hand, and she was writing with more scrawls, as if she wasn't used to it. I asked her, "Since when do you write with your other hand, honey?" She laughed and quickly replied, "Oh, just for fun, Mom. I'm practicing." I nodded without giving it more thought, but now that detail had become a sharp piece in my mind. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard the door open. Matthew ran in, his backpack bouncing on his back. He hugged me tightly, saying in his little chirping voice, "Grandma, the teacher complimented me today because I drew so well." I stroked his head, trying to smile, but I still felt a weight in my chest. Matthew sat down and pulled out his notebook to show me. "Grandma, look, yesterday my mom helped me with my homework with her right hand, and her writing was so pretty, but today she wrote with her left, and it came out uglier." The boy pointed to 2 pages in the notebook, one with well-formed letters and the other with crooked ones. I looked at the handwriting, and my heart sank. "Your mom must have been busy today. She was probably tired, that's why she wrote like that," I said, trying to hide my confusion. But Matthew looked up with his innocent eyes. "Grandma, my mom is so weird. Some days she hugs me really, really tight, but other days she doesn't even look at me." My grandson's words were another stab. I hugged him, trying to comfort him, but in my head everything was starting to get tangled up. Just then, the doorbell rang. I got up, opened the door, and saw Mrs. Collins, my good neighbor, standing there with the plate that Araceli had taken to her the day before. She smiled with her usual kind smile, but there was curiosity in her eyes. "Stella, your daughter-in-law is so nice, but yesterday I noticed she gave me the plate with her left hand, and you told me she's a righty, right? That's strange. Or maybe she uses both hands." I forced a smile and replied, "Maybe so, Helen. Do you want to come in for some tea?" She nodded and came in, but her comment was like a thorn stuck in me. It wasn't just me. Even the neighbors had noticed the difference. I served her tea and we talked about this and that, but as soon as she left, I sank onto the couch with my hand on my chest. I felt frozen, as if the world was falling down on me. That afternoon, I went out into the garden with the watering can, trying to let the water fall gently on the daisies I had cared for years. The sun was starting to set. The shadows of the trees stretched across the yard, but my soul could not find peace. The words of Matthew, of Mrs. Collins, and Ivan's firm voice on the phone kept circling in my head like pebbles thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples that wouldn't stop. I was watering the plants, but my mind wasn't there. I asked myself, am I too old now to notice the strange things happening in my own house, or have I been turning a blind eye on purpose, wanting to believe in the happy family I always dreamed of? Araceli returned from the market carrying her wicker basket, but what caught my attention was that she was holding it with her left hand. I remembered perfectly that Araceli always used her right hand, from how she held the knife to chop vegetables to how she combed Matthew's hair. I stood there, watching her put the basket on the kitchen table, and I asked her in a low voice, "What did you buy, Araceli?" My voice tried to sound natural, but inside a wave of suspicion was growing. She smiled and replied very politely, "I got some tomatoes, cilantro, and fresh fish, Mom. I'm going to make the roasted fish you like so much tonight. Does that sound good?" Her voice was soft, as always, but I couldn't help but notice her hands. The left one? No, the right one. I nodded and turned away, pretending to clean the table, but my heart was pounding hard. Was I imagining things, or were these small details trying to tell me something? At dinner time, the whole family gathered at the table. Stephen was tired after a long day at work, but he still smiled at Matthew and asked him how school had been. Araceli ate slowly, delicately, and even turned to Stephen to remind him, "Honey, the parent-teacher conference is next week, so be sure to take the day off." I looked at her, trying to find the daughter-in-law I was so proud of, but in my head, Ivan's voice kept echoing, "She's sitting in first class next to a man." I bit my lip, trying to swallow the anguish, but it felt like a stone stuck in my throat. Just 3 days later, everything was different. Matthew dropped a glass of water during dinner, and the water splashed all over the tablecloth. I quickly grabbed a rag to clean it, laughing, "It's okay, honey. Just be more careful." But Araceli, sitting across from him, suddenly frowned and said in a sharp voice, "Matthew, why are you so clumsy? Be more careful." I was stunned, looking at Stephen. He also frowned and said in a low voice, "Araceli, it was an accident. That's all." She turned with a spark of anger in her eyes. "You always defend him, and I end up looking like the bad guy in the house." The atmosphere at the table became heavy. Matthew lowered his head, his eyes full of tears. I hugged him, feeling a deep pain. Only a few days ago, Araceli had lovingly reminded him about school, and now she seemed like a completely different person. I sat next to her, watching in silence, trying to put the pieces together in my head. Today she was irritable. The other day she was so sweet. Today she used her left hand. The other day, her right. These small differences, one by one, were piling up in my mind like the pieces of a puzzle I still couldn't see completely. I told myself I had to calm down, but every time I looked at Araceli, I saw a stranger, as if she wasn't the daughter-in-law I had lived with for so many years. A few days later, I took Matthew to school. He held my hand as we walked down the same old cobblestone street. Suddenly, he stopped, looked at me, and said in a sad voice, "Grandma, yesterday my mom taught me how to write, and she was so patient. Her handwriting was so pretty, but today she didn't even want to look at my homework. She told me to do it by myself." I knelt down to look into his clear eyes, and I felt my heart break. "Your mom was busy, honey. Don't be sad," I said, but my voice trembled. Matthew nodded, but his gaze was still full of disappointment. I hugged him, feeling a huge sense of powerlessness. He's only 7. How was he supposed to understand something that I myself couldn't figure out? That night, we sat down to dinner again. Suddenly, Araceli took a small notebook out of her bag and started writing something with her left hand. Stephen, who was serving himself food, laughed suddenly. "Hey, since when do you write with your left hand? It looks so strange." Araceli stopped dead, with a forced smile on her lips. "Oh, just experimenting, honey." She quickly put the notebook away in her bag, but I noticed a flash of panic in her eyes. Stephen shook his head and didn't say anything else, but I knew he had also noticed something strange. I stayed seated there, gripping my spoon, trying to keep a straight face, but inside, the doubts were growing like a slow fire. One morning, I took an empty spice jar and crossed the same old cobblestone street to go to Mrs. Collins' house. Araceli had borrowed it a few weeks ago, saying it was for making the chili she liked so much. I knocked on the door, and Mrs. Collins opened it with her usual kind smile. "Stella, come in. Let me make you some coffee," she said, a rag still in her hand. I gave her the jar, thinking of thanking her and leaving, but she pulled me to sit in a wooden chair in her kitchen. The atmosphere was warm. It smelled of roasted coffee, but I couldn't relax. Mrs. Collins looked at me with eyes full of doubt and lowered her voice. "Stella, please don't get mad at what I'm about to say. Has your daughter-in-law's personality changed? One day she greets me so happily and even asks about my kids, but yesterday she passed by here. I waved at her and she didn't even acknowledge me, as if she didn't know me." Mrs. Collins's words were another stone in the troubled lake of my heart. I forced a smile and replied, "She must have been in a hurry, Helen. You know how young people are these days." But inside, I was a mess. I knew Mrs. Collins wasn't just talking to talk. She's a very sensitive person who always pays attention to details. If even she noticed how strange Araceli was, then my suspicions weren't just my imagination anymore. I stayed for a little while longer, took a sip of the now cold coffee, and said goodbye, my heart heavy. On my way back, I passed by Mr. Johnson's bakery, where I always bought sweetbread for Matthew. Mr. Johnson was at the counter, and when he saw me, he smiled. "Mrs. Brooks, what can I get for the little champ today?" I asked for some pastries, and he suddenly asked, "You're Stephen's mom, right? His wife came in the other day. So nice. She even told me how delicious my bread was. But this morning she came back with a scowl on her face. She bought the bread and didn't even say thank you. She just left." I froze, gripping the handle of my purse. "She must have been tired, Joe," I replied, my voice trembling. I thanked him quickly and left. Mr. Johnson's words were another knife, cutting deeper into the doubts that were growing inside me. When I got home, I made myself some tea and sat on the porch. The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of the daisies from the garden. I looked toward the street that led to the market, where Araceli always walked. Suddenly, I saw her returning, carrying her shopping bag, but she greeted me in a dry voice. "Good afternoon, Mom." No smile, no happiness like yesterday when she bragged about getting a good deal on the cilantro. I nodded and replied in a low voice, "You're back already?" But inside, I couldn't help but observe her more closely. The blouse she was wearing today was navy blue, different from the white blouse she had on when she left. I tried to ask her in a soft voice, "Why did you change your blouse?" Araceli paused for a second, and then quickly replied, "Oh, I got a stain on it and had to change." She smiled halfway and hurried into the kitchen. I stayed there with the teacup in my hands, feeling as if a rock was crushing my chest. The words of Mrs. Collins, of Mr. Johnson, and the way Araceli replied to me, everything forced me to stop ignoring things. That night we were all having dinner. Matthew was talking about school with his cheerful little voice, but I noticed that Araceli only nodded without answering him, unlike other times. When Stephen asked, "Are you done eating so your mom can clear the plates?" Matthew suddenly turned to me and said innocently, "Grandma, oh, my mom didn't sing to me to sleep. But yesterday she did sing that song, Cielito Lindo. You always sing to me, and it sounded so beautiful." I looked at Araceli, who was serving herself food without reacting, but Matthew's words were like a needle in my heart. That lullaby, that Cielito Lindo that I used to sing to Stephen and Yvonne, only Araceli and I knew it in this house. So why did she sing it yesterday and not today? Why did she change so quickly? I got up to clear the plates, but my mind was no longer there. I remembered the times Araceli would leave the house saying she was going to see a friend, but would return with a strange look. One day she brought a bouquet of fresh flowers, saying a friend had given them to her. But another day she got angry when I asked her, "Where did you go today that you got home so late?" I used to think these were unimportant things, but now they seemed like the pieces of a much bigger secret. I didn't want to believe that Araceli was hiding something from me, but every word, every gesture of hers made me doubt. That night, after cleaning the kitchen, I sat at the dining room table and took an old notebook out of a drawer. My hand was shaking as I wrote the first line. 3 p.m., Araceli leaves for the market. Returns 6 p.m. wearing a blue blouse. Irritable attitude. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that nothing was happening. I kept writing. Yesterday she sang to Matthew to sleep, tender. Today she was cold, didn't sing. Each word was a heavy stroke, as if I was engraving my suspicions into reality. My old notebook was now full of notes about Araceli. Every line was a piece of my doubt, as if I was painting a picture I didn't dare to look at. I sat in the kitchen, looking at the notebook with a heavy heart. I couldn't keep all these thoughts to myself anymore. They were like waves rising and falling, leaving me alone in my confusion. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would understand me, who wouldn't judge me, who wouldn't jump to conclusions. I immediately thought of Carol, my best friend, who has been with me since we were young, when we used to sit and knit under a tree and tell each other our lives. I picked up the phone, my voice trembling. "Carol, are you free this afternoon? Let's go to the coffee shop on the corner. I need to talk." Carol accepted instantly, her voice as warm as ever. "Stella, I knew something was wrong. Wait for me. I'm on my way." I felt a little relief, but the worry was still weighing me down. I put on my old shawl and left the house for the small coffee shop on the corner, where Carol and I had shared so many joys and sorrows. The place was the same, with its dark wooden tables and that delicious smell of freshly roasted coffee. I chose a table in a corner where the light was dim so no one would hear our conversation. I sat there, hugging the hot coffee cup, but with my soul cold. I wondered how I was going to tell her about all these suspicions. How was I going to dare to admit that I was doubting my own daughter-in-law? Carol arrived wearing a light sweater and carrying a bag of fresh vegetables. She sat down and looked me straight in the eyes with that sharp but affectionate gaze. "Stella, just looking at your face, I know something big is wrong. Come on, let it out. What's got you so worried?" I took a deep breath, trying not to let my voice break, but every word got stuck in my throat. I told her everything in a summary. Ivan's call from the airport, Araceli's passport, the woman identical to her on the plane, and all the small details I had written down, from how she changed hands to right to her mood, changing from day to night. I took the notebook out of my bag and handed it to her. Look, I wrote it all down here. I don't know if I'm imagining it, but I can't be a fool anymore. Carol flipped through the pages with a frown. She read my shaky handwriting slowly. "You've noticed everything, Stella," she said in a serious voice. "Every time she leaves and comes back, it's like she's another person. What do you think it is?" I shook my head, gripping the coffee cup. "I don't know, Carol. I just know I'm scared. Scared that Araceli is hiding something. Scared that my family will break apart if I dig any deeper. But I can't stop. I have to know the truth. For Stephen. For Matthew." Carol put her cup on the table and looked at me with determination. "You can't fool a woman easily, Stella. What does your gut tell you? I'm sure there's something shady going on here. You have to get to the bottom of this." I hesitated, and my voice became a whisper. "But what if I'm misjudging her? What if I hurt Stephen?" Carol interrupted me firmly. "Trust your gut. If you don't find out the truth, you'll always live with the doubt, and you won't be able to protect Matthew or Stephen." Just then, Mrs. Jenkins, the lady who sells vegetables at the market and whom I know, came into the coffee shop. She recognized me and smiled. "Mrs. Brooks, what a coincidence. Last week I saw your daughter-in-law at the market. She was so kind. She even bought an extra bunch of cilantro to cook with. But this morning, she came by again looking so serious. She didn't even say hello. She bought her vegetables and left. Is something wrong with your daughter-in-law?" I forced a smile and replied, "She must be tired, Marie." But inside, I felt like I was drowning. Another person who noticed how strange Araceli was. I thanked Mrs. Jenkins, watched her leave, and turned back to Carol, panic reflected in my eyes. Carol took my hand and her voice softened. "See, Stella, it's not just you. Even the neighbors notice. Don't lie to yourself anymore. Keep writing everything down, and if you have to, you're going to have to follow her, not to hurt her, but to protect your family." I nodded, but my heart sank. I knew Carol was right, but the idea of following my own daughter-in-law made me feel as if I was betraying my family. I had spent my whole life taking care of this home, and now I had to do something I never imagined: investigate one of my own. That afternoon, I returned home, my head still a mess. Araceli left the house carrying her familiar red basket. "Mom, I'm going to the market for a bit," she said in a soft voice. I nodded, but as soon as she disappeared behind the gate, I opened my notebook and wrote, 3 p.m. Araceli leaves for the market, carrying a red basket, normal attitude. I stayed there, watching the clock, counting every minute. At 6, Araceli returned. But the basket she was holding in her hand was now blue. I was surprised and asked her, "Did you switch baskets?" She smiled and quickly replied, "Yes, the other one broke, and a friend lent me this one." I nodded, but my hands were shaking as I added to the notebook. Returned 6 p.m., carrying a blue basket, voice a little rushed. My notes were piling up. Each line was one step closer to the truth, but also one step away from the image of the old mother who only knows how to love and trust. On the weekend, Stephen left for overtime work early, and Matthew was at a school activity, leaving the house quiet, just for Araceli and me. I was cleaning the dining room table, trying to keep myself busy to ward off the doubts that were eating at me. But then Araceli came down from her room in a pale yellow floral dress, looking as fresh as she did in her first days of marriage. "Mom, I'm going to the market for a bit," she said in a soft voice. She took her usual wicker basket and left. I nodded, smiling, but inside a voice insisted, "Follow her, Stella. Go find the truth." I didn't think twice. I took my old shawl, put it over my head to cover my face a little, and left the house in silence, keeping a safe distance behind Araceli. The sun was hot, sweat was soaking my back, but I didn't care. I just wanted to know where she was really going, what she was doing. Araceli walked quickly down the cobblestone street that led to the market, but suddenly, instead of turning right as always, she turned left into an alley behind a working-class neighborhood. The houses were old, crammed against each other, with peeling paint and rusty tin roofs. I slowed down, my heart pounding, trying to hide behind some bicycles parked on the sidewalk. Araceli didn't look back. She kept walking. She went into an even narrower alley where the sunlight barely reached. I hid behind a mechanic's shop where a man was concentrating on tightening nuts. I saw Araceli stop in front of an old wooden door, knock softly, and then go in and disappear. I stood there, my breathing ragged, my head spinning. What was my daughter-in-law doing there? This wasn't the market or any of the friends' houses she had mentioned. I wanted to walk over, knock on the door, and ask her directly, but my feet seemed to be nailed to the ground. I was afraid of the truth, afraid that what I was about to discover would break everything. In the end, I turned around and went back home full of questions, each step heavier than the last. I had barely pushed the gate open when I froze. Araceli was standing in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a white blouse on, completely different from the floral dress she had left in. She was frowning and looked at me with cold, sharp eyes. "Where did you go, Mom, that you're just getting back?" I stood frozen, my mouth dry, unable to say a word. Only a few minutes ago, I had seen her go into that alley in a yellow dress. How could she have gotten back so quickly? And this blouse? I stammered. I just went for a walk, that's all. Araceli nodded without saying anything else, but her gaze sent a shiver down my spine. I went up to my room, pretending to look for something, but in reality, it was to escape that look, to calm my heart that was pounding wildly in my chest. That night, I was sitting knitting when Matthew ran into my room, his cheeks red from playing in the yard. He hugged my legs, sobbing, "Grandma, my mom yelled at me just because I dropped a pencil. Not like yesterday. Yesterday she was so nice, she even hugged me." I took Matthew in my arms, stroked his head, but inside, I felt like I was burning. "Your mom was tired, honey." "Don't be sad," I said, but my voice trembled. Matthew hid his face in my shoulder and whispered, "Grandma, I want the mom from yesterday." I hugged him tighter, tears about to fall. My grandson's words were like a knife, engraving my suspicions even deeper. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The images repeated over and over in my head. Araceli, in the floral dress, going into the alley. Araceli, in the white blouse, standing in the kitchen. And Ivan's voice. "She's on my flight." I took the notebook out of the drawer and wrote a sentence. I didn't even dare to believe myself. Maybe they are not the same person. That sentence felt like a curse and made me tremble. The next morning, I decided to go back to that alley. I couldn't bear the doubt anymore. I took the family photo that hangs in the living room, the one where Araceli smiles radiantly next to Stephen and Matthew. I held it tight and left the house, determined but terrified. The alley was the same as yesterday, silent and somber. I stopped next to a corn stand where a middle-aged woman was fanning the charcoal. I showed her the photo and asked, "Excuse me, have you seen this young woman around here?" The woman looked at it closely and then pointed. "Oh, yes, of course. She comes and goes often from the house at number 14, that one over there." I thanked her, my heart pounding in my throat, and walked straight to that house. The house at number 14 appeared in front of me, with stained walls, a peeling wooden door, and a pot with a wilted daisy on the window frame. I stood there, my hands trembling, feeling that the whole world was holding its breath with me. I knocked on the door, and each knock sounded like a hammer blow to my chest. The door opened, and I was speechless. In front of me was a woman identical to Araceli, from her face, to her body, to her long black hair. The only difference was her frightened look and her hands that were shaking as she held a rag. I stammered, my voice breaking. "Araceli?" The young woman started, gripped the rag tightly, and tried to slam the door shut. But just then, another voice was heard from inside, a soft but firm voice. "Isadora, don't hide anymore. You know this is wrong, too." I looked up and saw a young woman come out of a corner of the room, standing right behind the woman who looked just like Araceli. She was thin, with her hair in a bun, and had an intelligent but kind look. She looked at me and smiled slightly. "My name is Lucy Miller, Isadora's roommate, Mrs. Brooks. Please come in. It's time you knew the truth." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my legs from trembling, and went into that small, tin-roofed house. The walls were stained, the concrete floor was cracked, and a faint smell of disinfectant hung in the air. In a corner, an old man coughed weakly, lying on an old cot covered with a frayed blanket. I felt the space crushing me, but I still walked and sat down in the wooden chair that Lucy pointed to. The woman identical to Araceli lowered her face, and her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I'm not Araceli. My name is Isadora." I looked at her, my mind a whirlwind, unable to say anything. Isadora. The name was strange, but the face was too familiar. I clasped my hands, trying to keep my voice firm. "You explain to me why you look so much like my daughter-in-law, and why you show up at my house." Isadora looked up, her eyes full of guilt, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, Lucy sat down next to her, poured a glass of water from an old plastic jug, and began to speak. "Isadora is very poor, Mrs. Brooks," Lucy said in a calm, clear voice. "Her adopted parents are very ill, especially the gentleman lying down there. A few years ago, Isadora met Araceli by chance at a market. They looked like two peas in a pod, and Araceli took advantage of that. She proposed that Isadora pretend to be her, that she replace her for a few hours whenever she needed to. Isadora didn't want to, but Araceli paid her very well, and her family needed the money for medicine." I looked at Isadora and saw that her head was bowed, gripping the rag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Replace her for what?" I pressed, my voice full of disbelief. "Why would Araceli need someone to pretend to be her?" Isadora looked up, her voice trembling. "I don't know everything, ma'am. She would just tell me, 'You just stay in the house for a few hours. Do some things like go to the market, take care of the boy,' and then she would give me money. A lot of money, enough to buy my parents' medicine. I didn't dare to ask for more." She lowered her head, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. I looked at her, my chest feeling tight. Every strange detail from the last few months suddenly made sense. The change of hands for writing, the personality that was sometimes sweet and sometimes sour, the voice that was sometimes gentle and sometimes cold. Everything fit now, like the last pieces of a puzzle I had refused to see. Lucy continued with a sharper look. "I don't know if this helps, but once I saw Araceli with a very elegant man. His name is Charles Thompson. I heard the name when they were talking at a coffee shop. They were calling each other honey very affectionately. At that moment, Isadora was waiting outside in the car, not understanding anything. The name Charles Thompson was like a knife in my heart. I remembered Ivan's words. She's sitting in first class next to a rich man. The small room seemed to spin around me. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking so much that I knocked over the glass of water. Lucy rushed to clean it up, but I just shook my head. My voice choked. Araceli is deceiving my family." Isadora broke down, her voice choked with sobs. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to save my parents." I looked at this young woman with a face identical to Araceli's, but with a look full of pain and regret. I wanted to get angry. I wanted to scream. But seeing Isadora, I only felt pity. She wasn't the mastermind. She was just a piece in Araceli's game. Everything was falling apart in front of my eyes. I got up, trying to make my voice sound firm. "Isadora, do you know where Araceli is? Do you know what she does when she asks you to pretend to be her?" Isadora shook her head, still crying. "I don't know, ma'am. She would just tell me to do what she asked and that she would pay me. I didn't dare to ask for more." Lucy put a hand on her shoulder to comfort her and then addressed me. Mrs. Brooks, I know this is very painful for you, but Isadora is also a victim. She didn't have another choice. I looked around the humble house, hearing the weak voice of the man on the cot. I understood Isadora's desperation, but that didn't erase the feeling of betrayal I felt. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the tears. I don't blame you, Isadora, but I need to know the truth. I need to protect my son and my grandson. I got up, feeling that the world was collapsing on me. Thank you, Lucy, for telling me the truth. I'll be back. I left the house, and the bright sun outside blinded me, but my heart was cold. The next morning, I went back to that small alley where the stained walls and the peeling wooden door had become an obsession in my mind. The sun was still hot, but I felt a coldness inside, as if I was carrying a cold wind of unresolved doubts. I knocked on the door of number 14, gripping the family photo as if it were an amulet that would give me the courage to face the truth. This time, Isadora didn't seem so scared. She opened the door with a still shy but calmer look and invited me in. Mrs. Brooks, I was expecting you. Please, come in. The house was still small, with that smell of disinfectant and the weak cough of the man on the cot. I sat in the old wooden chair and looked at Isadora. She was wearing a simple blouse, her hair in a loose bun. She looked tired, but no longer frightened. I took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Isadora, I want to meet your adoptive mom. I need to understand all of this better. Isadora nodded and led me to a corner of the room where a very thin woman with completely white hair was lying in bed, her cloudy eyes staring at the ceiling. She was Mrs. Jones, Isadora's adoptive mother. I took her frail hand and introduced myself. I'm Stella Brooks, Stephen's mom, Araceli's husband. Mrs. Jones looked at me, breathing with difficulty, and said in a weak voice, Isadora is not my blood daughter. She's a child I adopted when she was a newborn. Her words were like a hammer blow to my head. I froze, my heart beating faster, but I tried to make my voice sound calm. Please, tell me how it all happened. The lady coughed, and then, slowly, began to tell me a story I wasn't prepared for. Many years ago, I was a nurse at a hospital in a small town, she began, her voice trembling. A very poor family had twins. They were so poor they couldn't keep both of them. The mom was crying. She said she could only keep one. The other one they were going to abandon. My heart broke. I couldn't let them abandon that baby. So I adopted her. That's Isadora. She stopped for a long cough and then looked at Isadora with immense love. I raised her as if she were my own, but I know she has always wanted to find her real parents. I have nothing to give her but my love, and this house. I sat there, gripping the edge of the chair, my head spinning. Do you know who Isadora's biological parents are? I asked, my voice trembling. Mrs. Jones shook her head. I only know they were a poor family from a nearby town. I didn't ask much. I just wanted to save the child. I looked at Isadora and saw her with her face bowed, tears rolling down. Mrs. Brooks, I don't know anything about my biological parents, she said, her voice choked. But when I met Araceli, I thought maybe she knew something. She looks so much like me, but she never told me anything about that. I felt a lack of air. I asked Mrs. Jones to let me see her old papers, hoping to find a clue. She pointed to an old wooden dresser. Isadora took out a yellowish paper envelope and gave it to me. Inside, there was a copy of some hospital papers with Isadora's date of birth. I read them quickly and felt my heart stop. Isadora's date of birth was exactly the same as Araceli's, the one I had seen on her papers when she married Stephen. I gripped the documents with trembling hands and looked at Isadora. You and Araceli could be twin sisters, I said, my voice lost. Isadora broke down crying, covering her face. So Araceli is my sister? Why didn't she tell me anything? Why did she make me do all that? I looked at her, my heart shattered. I remembered the days when Araceli came to my house, radiant and confident, as if she had been born to be the perfect wife and mother. I had loved her. I had believed she would give Stephen happiness, but now I knew that she had not only deceived my family, but she had also taken advantage of her own sister, using her as a double to hide secrets I didn't even dare to imagine. I stood up, put my hand on Isadora's shoulder, and my voice, though firm, could not hide the pain. Isadora, from today on, I won't let anyone else take advantage of you. I'm going to help your parents with their illness, but in return, you have to cooperate with me. I need to bring this truth to light, for Stephen, for Matthew. Isadora nodded, still crying. I will help you. I don't want to live in this lie anymore. I looked at her and saw sincerity in her eyes, and for the first time I felt a ray of hope in the middle of the storm. I left the house and walked through the alley, my soul in turmoil. I passed by the bustling market where people were shopping and laughing, but in my mind, Mrs. Jones's words echoed like bells. 2 twins, one abandoned, the other raised, and now their destinies had crossed in my own family. I returned home, my soul a mess, like a field after a storm. The truth about Araceli and Isadora, the secret of the twins, was a rock crushing my chest. I was at a crossroads for which I was not prepared, to confront my daughter-in-law, the woman who had deceived us all, and to reveal the truth to Stephen and Matthew. That night I called Ivan. My voice was firm, though my heart was trembling. Ivan, you have to come home tomorrow night. There are some things I need you to clarify. Ivan was surprised. I could hear the worry in his voice. Mom, did something serious happen? I said bluntly, you just come, honey. I need you, and if you can, bring Araceli's electronic passport. He didn't ask any more questions. He just said, yes, Mom, I'll be there. I hung up and sat down, feeling that the whole world was crashing down on me. I knew that tomorrow night would be one that no one in this family would ever forget. The next day, I got up early and prepared a big family dinner. I put a white tablecloth on the table, lit some candles. I cooked the chili that Stephen likes so much and the roasted fish that Matthew always asks for. I wanted this dinner to be special, not to celebrate, but to mark a before and after. I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, but my mind was somewhere else, between that dark alley and Isadora's words. I told myself I had to be strong for Stephen, for Matthew, but each cut of the knife felt like a cut in my own heart. Stephen got home as it was starting to get dark, tired from work. Seeing the table set, he was surprised. What are we celebrating? Why did you make so much food, Mom? I smiled, trying to seem calm. I just wanted all of us to have a nice dinner. Sit down, honey. Araceli came in with her light blue dress, a soft smile, but a bit of nervousness in her eyes. Matthew ran to hug my legs. Grandma, the fish smells so good. I stroked his head, a lump in my throat. I knew that after this night, Matthew's innocent smile might never be so carefree again. We sat down at the table, and at first the atmosphere was lively. Stephen talked about work. Matthew spoke excitedly about the drawing he had made at school. Araceli nodded, commenting occasionally, but I noticed her hand was shaking a little as she held her spoon. I took a deep breath and signaled to Ivan, who was waiting outside. He came in, and right behind him was Isadora in a simple dress, her face identical to Araceli's, but with a look full of anguish. Everyone at the table fell silent. Matthew looked confused from Araceli to Isadora and asked innocently, "Why are there 2 moms?" Stephen turned pale, dropped his spoon, and Araceli jumped up, shouting, "What is this about, Mom?" I stood up, gripping the edge of the table to keep from shaking. "Sit down, Araceli," I said in a slow but firm voice. "I need us to clear everything up." I started telling the story, and each word tore me up inside. Ivan's call from the airport when he saw her on a flight to France, even though she was still at home, the time she changed hands to write, her personality, sometimes sweet and sometimes sour, and finally, my visit to the alley where I met Isadora and discovered the secret of the twins. "You and Isadora are twin sisters," I said, looking her straight in the eyes. "You took advantage of your sister to hide the truth. Tell us what the truth is." Araceli was trembling, her face as white as paper. She yelled, trying to defend herself. "She's making it all up to humiliate me. How dare you?" But Yvonne walked over and put a stack of papers on the table with a thud. "This is a copy of your electronic passport with the entry and exit stamp from France," he said in a hard voice. "You can't be at home and flying to France at the same time." Araceli looked at the papers, her lips tight, unable to say anything. Matthew, sitting next to her, suddenly chimed in with an innocent but pained voice. "It's true, Grandma. Some days my mom is an angel and other days she's really mean. I don't like the mean mom." My grandson's words were like a stab, and I had to hold back from crying. The air in the room felt so heavy it was hard to breathe. I nodded and signaled to Lucy, who had just come in through the back door. She stood there with her sharp gaze and told everyone, "I saw Araceli with Charles Thompson. They were calling each other honey, and it was she who hired Isadora to pretend to be her and deceive the family." Stephen turned to his wife, his voice choked. "Is it true, Araceli? Tell me, is it true?" Araceli bit her lip in silence for a long moment and then suddenly yelled, her voice full of fury. "Yes, it's true. I have a lover. I'm sick of this poor life. I'm sick of being the daughter-in-law in this house. Charles gives me a life 100 times better. And you, Stephen, you're good for nothing." Her words were like a bomb that exploded in the room. Stephen froze, clenching his fists so hard they turned white. Matthew broke down crying and ran to hug me, his voice trembling. "Grandma, what did my mom say?" I hugged him tightly, and tears rolled down my cheeks. I looked at Araceli with a broken heart. She was standing there with a cold look, without a shred of remorse. Stephen got up, his voice shaking. "Araceli, do you really think that?" She turned and left without answering. Isadora, who had been silent on the side, suddenly spoke in a low but clear voice. "Sister, you didn't have to hurt them like that. I just wanted to help you, but I didn't know you would go this far." Araceli glared at her, but didn't say anything. She just turned around and left. The door slammed shut, leaving the room in a painful silence. After that night of confrontation, the air in my house felt like it had been robbed of life. The living room that used to be filled with Matthew's laughter and Stephen's talks was now in a silence that suffocated. I had lived my whole life for my family, but now I felt like someone who had just survived a hurricane, standing in the middle of the rubble of the home I had cared for so much. Araceli left after shouting those bitter words, leaving Stephen with an empty look and Matthew with innocent tears. I knew everything had changed forever. A week later, Stephen and Araceli went to the courthouse for the divorce. I didn't go, but Stephen told me about it afterward, his voice dry, as if he had lost his soul. "Mom, she didn't look at me or Matthew. She signed the papers and left with that man, as if we had never existed." I sat next to him, taking his hand, trying not to cry. Araceli didn't ask for custody of Matthew, as if the boy had just been part of a play she had gotten tired of. My heart ached, not only for Stephen, but for Matthew, a 7-year-old boy who didn't deserve to be abandoned like that. "Don't worry, honey," I said, my voice trembling. "I'll always be here, and Matthew will never be without love." But inside, I knew this wound would take a long time to heal. Stephen fell apart. He became quiet, spoke little. He just buried himself in his work or sat watching Matthew play in the yard. I looked at my son and saw in his eyes the same sadness that my husband, Raphael, had in his last days when he knew he couldn't stay with us anymore. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I didn't know where to start. Fortunately, Isadora appeared, silent as a small light in the darkness. She came to the house every day. She brought containers of warm food, sat down to play with Matthew, and wiped away his tears when he asked, "Auntie, where did my mom really go?" I looked at Isadora, saw that face identical to Araceli's, but with a completely different heart. She was sweet, patient, and always found a way to make Matthew laugh. One afternoon, I saw Matthew run to hug Isadora with his cheerful little voice. "Mom, Isadora, teach me how to draw a little bird." I was surprised, my heart tight. The boy was calling her mom with a carefree smile I hadn't seen in a long time. Isadora laughed and stroked his head. "Of course, my love, but you have to draw it very pretty so I can see it." I stood there, tears rolling down my cheeks. Matthew's innocent words were like medicine that soothed my pain. I knew that Isadora had not only replaced Araceli during those days of deception, but was becoming a part of our family with her own sincere heart. One night, while I was cleaning the kitchen, Stephen called me to the living room. He was standing there, holding a small ring with trembling hands. His look was a mix of nerves and determination. Isadora was by his side, her face flushed and her eyes shining. Stephen knelt, and his voice broke. "Isadora, I don't want to waste any more time. You brought light back to me and Matthew. Would you accept to be my wife and Matthew's mom?" Isadora broke down crying, looking at me as if seeking my approval. I walked over, took her hand, and nodded gently. "You deserve it, honey. You've been part of this family for a long time." She hugged me. Her tears soaked my shoulder, and I knew that was the moment my family was beginning to heal. Stephen and Isadora's wedding was soon after, something small but full of love. I was in the yard, looking at the red roses tied to the fence, listening to Matthew's laughter as he wore his little suit, being his dad's tiny best man. Ivan flew back from a work trip and stood next to his brother with a smile as radiant as the day he first put on his pilot's uniform. I sat in the front row, tears rolling down my cheeks. They weren't tears of loss, but of happiness. I looked at Isadora in her simple wedding dress, holding Stephen's hand, and I knew that my family had found a sincere heart. After losing a fraud, life after that went back to normal. Isadora maintained her simple life, taking care of Stephen and Matthew with all her love. She cooked warm meals, sang to Matthew to sleep with the same Cielito Lindo that I used to sing to my sons. Every night she sat next to Stephen, listening to him talk about his blueprints and projects with a look full of pride. Matthew no longer asked about his other mom. He just snuggled with Isadora, calling her mom with a radiant smile. I looked at my family and saw how the wounds were slowly closing. One late night, I sat on the porch. The wind blew softly in the garden. Matthew's laughter could be heard from inside, mixed with Isadora's sweet voice. I peeked in and saw Stephen concentrating on his work while Isadora prepared a cup of tea for him, placing it beside him and giving him a soft kiss on his forehead. I smiled, feeling my heart finally at peace. I thought about the long road I had traveled from the first doubts, from Ivan's call to that dark alley where I discovered the truth. The truth had been cruel, but as my husband Raphael used to say, "The truth will set you free, Stella." And so it was. The truth set us free. It brought us Isadora and gave us a new beginning, much brighter and happier. The story you have just heard has been changed in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We are not telling this to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect on how many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I am leaving you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.